In 1969, demolition crews began dismantling a pink marble facade on Avenue Foch. The stone did not resist. It had already endured greater pressures. It had stood through artillery echoes from the First World War. It had survived occupation during the Second. German officers had walked beneath its ceilings, Allied liberation had passed outside its gates. The building remained intact. Its staircases did not collapse. Its salons did not burn. Instead, in a decade of relative peace, cranes lifted away its cornices piece by piece. The Palais Rose had once faced the Bois de Boulogne with deliberate symmetry. Its facade, soft rose marble veined like diluted wine, caught the Parisian light in a way that made it appear almost theatrical. Behind it lay a grand staircase modeled after Versailles, reception rooms aligned for procession, and ceilings designed to amplify candlelight. The house was not hidden. It announced itself. It had been conceived as permanence. Not simply as a residence, but as a declaration in stone: wealth could purchase history, devotion to form could manufacture lineage. Its proportions were calculated to converse with the architecture of French monarchy. Its materials were chosen to imply inheritance rather than acquisition. And yet, less than a century after its completion, the structure was reduced to fragments. Marble was catalogued, sold, relocated. Panels were removed. The site was cleared for redevelopment. No bomb had shattered it. No revolution had seized it. There was no dramatic siege, no fire consuming its tapestries. The end came quietly, bureaucratically, through transactions and signatures. The mansion had survived war, occupation, and the violent reordering of Europe. It did not survive peace. What does it mean for a palace built to force entry into the oldest aristocracy in Europe to vanish not from destruction, but from indifference? Before it was a palace, the land was unremarkable. In the final decades of the 19th century, the western edge of Paris was still adjusting to its own expansion. Baron Haussmann's grand boulevards had redrawn the city's arteries, pushing prestige steadily outward. The Avenue du Bois, later renamed Avenue Foch, was wide, orderly, and aspirational. It bordered the Bois de Boulogne, a landscape designed to provide the illusion of rural serenity within urban control. Yet for all its promise, it remained a frontier of ambition rather than an established center of power. Plots were bought and sold. Some were developed cautiously. Others sat empty behind provisional fencing. The soil did not yet carry memory. The aristocracy of the Faubourg Saint-Germain, anchored in older quarters of Paris, viewed this western district with reserve. It was too new. Its prestige was planned rather than inherited. Its symmetry felt engineered. In the rigid hierarchy of French society, geography carried implication. To live west was to announce movement, possibly upward, possibly intrusive. At this moment, two currents were converging in Europe. The first was old and territorial, ancient families guarding lineage, titles, and tradition. The second was fluid and international, industrial wealth crossing oceans, capital untethered from land or ancestry. Railways, banking networks, and colonial trade had compressed distances. Money could now travel faster than reputation. Among the most visible embodiments of this second current was the banking dynasty of the Rothschild family. Their influence extended across Paris, London, Vienna, and Frankfurt. They financed governments, stabilized currencies, and invested in railroads and industry. Their residences were numerous, yet strategically placed, often near the centers of established power rather than on its speculative edges. The Avenue du Bois did not yet represent that center. Meanwhile, the French aristocracy faced quiet instability. The Third Republic had replaced monarchy. Titles remained, but political authority had shifted. For some families, prestige endured without administrative function. For others, wealth had thinned through division and maintenance of estates whose scale no longer matched income. Marriage became a mechanism of recalibration. Across the Atlantic, American fortunes were rising at unprecedented speed. Railroads, steel, oil, and finance produced families whose wealth outpaced that of many European houses. Yet these families lacked hereditary titles. They possessed liquidity but not lineage. For daughters of such dynasties, marriage into European nobility offered a form of cultural acquisition, an exchange of capital for continuity. In 1895, Anna Gould, daughter of American railroad magnate Jay Gould, married Count Boniface de Castellane. The union was widely discussed, though not universally admired. The marriage linked immense American industrial wealth with an ancient French title whose financial footing had grown uncertain. The Avenue du Bois became relevant through this alliance. At the time of the marriage, there was no Palais Rose. There was only land, purchased, surveyed, and largely without distinction. No passerby could have predicted that this plot would soon attempt to rival Versailles in miniature. It did not command history. It did not command deference. It was simply available. Count Boniface de Castellane, known for his elegance and devotion to ceremony, understood the symbolic weight of setting. He admired the rituals of the Ancien Regime. He cultivated appearances with precision, dress, carriage, and hospitality all carefully composed. Yet his inherited resources did not fully support the scale of lifestyle he envisioned. Anna Gould's dowry altered that equation. Still, in these early years, nothing inevitable attached itself to the property on the Avenue du Bois. Paris contained many grand houses. New fortunes commissioned facades that echoed classical motifs. Some were admired. Others were quietly tolerated. Few endured in collective memory. There was no guarantee that this address would become a reference point in architectural history. It was simply one more site in a city accustomed to reinvention. Builders walked its perimeter. Plans were discussed. Architects were consulted. The ambition had not yet taken physical form. The ground remained level, untested by foundations. Neighbors observed with curiosity rather than reverence. The area was prosperous but not yet saturated with legend. Carriages passed, trees lined the boulevard, the Bois de Boulogne provided controlled wilderness beyond the gates. No one spoke of permanence. In retrospect, it is tempting to assign inevitability to places that later acquire myth. But at the beginning, this plot held no narrative. It did not yet represent a challenge to aristocratic hierarchy. It did not yet attempt to purchase cultural memory. It did not yet project dynastic aspiration through stone. It was merely land on a wide avenue, open, undeclared, and unremarkable. Construction began in 1896. The commission did not call for discretion. It called for authority. Count Boniface de Castellane selected architect Ernest Sanson, a specialist in aristocratic revivalism. Sanson did not design in the language of modernity. He designed in the grammar of memory. His references were not industrial structures or urban innovation, but the 17th and 18th centuries, an era when French architecture functioned as an extension of monarchy itself. The model was the Grand Trianon at Versailles. This choice was deliberate. The Trianon was not the palace of governance, it was the palace of intimacy and privilege. To echo it was to position oneself in proximity to the symbolic center of French sovereignty without directly imitating the primary royal facade. It suggested cultivated refinement rather than ambition alone. The new residence would be named the Palais Rose. Its exterior was clad in rose-colored marble, quarried and transported at significant expense. The stone was neither subtle nor ostentatious, it carried a controlled warmth, shifting tone with Parisian light. On overcast days, it appeared pale and restrained. Under direct sun, it seemed luminous. The material itself announced cost, not through ornament, but through rarity. The facade stretched with formal symmetry across the avenue. Corinthian pilasters framed tall windows. A balustrade crowned the roofline. The entrance court was composed to slow arrival. Carriages approached through gates, paused within an oval forecourt, and then aligned directly with the central doors. Every movement was choreographed. Scale was calculated in comparison to its neighbors. Where surrounding hotels' particulars were generous but contained, the Palais Rose extended beyond residential expectation. Its reception rooms alone equaled the footprint of entire adjacent townhouses. The grand staircase, modeled after Versailles, rose with theatrical breadth, its marble steps wide enough to allow two parallel ascents without interruption. Inside, proportions adhered to classical ratios. Ceilings soared but did not overwhelm. Ornament was abundant yet disciplined. Gilded moldings traced ceilings in precise geometry. Mirrors amplified candlelight, multiplying the illusion of depth. Floors were laid in parquet patterns requiring meticulous labor. Silk wall coverings muted sound, allowing conversation to carry without echo. The house was not designed for comfort in the modern sense. It was designed for display. Rooms aligned in enfilade, permitting a sequence of controlled revelation. A guest entering the first salon would glimpse the second through aligned doorways, then the third beyond. This architectural alignment created perspective, each threshold reinforcing the impression of continuity and command. Private chambers were recessed, secondary to ceremonial space. The hierarchy of rooms reflected the hierarchy of social life. Public display occupied the most luminous zones, intimacy retreated toward interior courtyards. Cost figures circulated in Parisian society. While exact numbers varied, contemporaries understood that the expenditure rivaled that of small provincial chateaux. The dowry that financed construction flowed from American industry into French stone. It was said that the marble alone exceeded the annual income of certain minor aristocratic families. The symbolism was unmistakable. This was not a house grown organically from inherited land. It was a constructed argument. It asserted that wealth, when properly applied, could reconstruct the aesthetic language of Ancien Régime France. It implied that tradition was reproducible through faithful imitation. Yet imitation was not the sole objective. The Palais Rose incorporated modern conveniences discreetly, central heating concealed within walls, advanced plumbing, and service corridors allowing staff to circulate unseen. Behind classical facades lay contemporary infrastructure. The building balanced nostalgia with efficiency. Gardens were designed in geometric restraint. Parterres echoed French formal tradition, trimmed with precision. From upper windows, the symmetry extended outward, reinforcing the sense that the house commanded its environment. Every element communicated intention. The pink marble facade was more than decoration. It distinguished the residents from limestone neighbors. It made the building immediately identifiable. It could not be mistaken for inherited antiquity, it was too fresh, too deliberate. Yet its design language anchored it in a lineage centuries older than its foundation. Society reacted with a mixture of admiration and skepticism. Invitations to receptions at the Palais Rose became coveted. Guests described candlelit dinners beneath glittering chandeliers, orchestras positioned along the staircase, uniforms and gowns reflecting light across mirrored panels. The building functioned as a stage. Count de Castellane understood ceremony. He orchestrated evenings with precision. Guests ascended the staircase in measured sequence. Footmen aligned along corridors. The architecture magnified every gesture, turning arrival into performance. In this environment, the house seemed to fulfill its purpose. It translated transatlantic capital into European legitimacy. It stood on Avenue du Bois as a declaration that lineage could be architecturally composed. Yet permanence is not achieved through scale alone. The Palais Rose depended on continuous expenditure, staff, maintenance, heating vast salons through Parisian winters, preserving marble against soot and weather. Its surfaces required vigilance. Its grandeur demanded repetition. Ceremony had to recur, or the building would stand empty, its proportions too large for ordinary domestic life. Still, in the years immediately following its completion, the mansion appeared secure. Its facade reflected carriage lamps, its salons echoed with controlled conversation. From the Bois de Boulogne, its profile resembled a transplanted fragment of Versailles. Ambition had become physical. The land that once held no distinction now carried one of the most conspicuous private residences in Paris. The Palais Rose did not blend into its surroundings. It insisted upon recognition. In stone, symmetry, and rose-colored marble, a social argument had taken form. Once completed, the Palais Rose required constant animation. A building of such scale could not exist passively. Its corridors were too long, its ceilings too high, its surfaces too polished to remain unused. Without movement, without footmen crossing galleries, musicians tuning instruments, guests circulating in measured patterns, the house felt incomplete. Daily life inside did not resemble ordinary domestic rhythm. It followed ritual. Mornings were comparatively restrained. Light filtered through tall windows facing the avenue, striking parquet floors and tracing the edges of gilded moldings. Staff moved first. Fires were laid in marble fireplaces. Curtains were adjusted to control brightness. Floors were inspected for scuffs. Fresh flowers were arranged in salons that might remain empty until evening. The architecture dictated sequence. Rooms aligned in enfilade required doors to remain precisely positioned. A single misalignment disrupted perspective. The illusion of endless continuity depended on maintenance. Count Boniface de Castellane treated the house as an extension of self. He moved through it with awareness of sightlines. His presence on the grand staircase was calculated, descending slowly enough for observation, pausing at landings to allow conversation to gather. The staircase was not merely a structural feature, it was a stage upon which social hierarchy became visible. Anna Gould occupied the building differently. Her dowry financed its marble and mirrors, yet her position within its symbolism was complex. In the grand salons, she hosted and received. In private chambers, she withdrew from the performance. The architecture magnified both roles. Public rooms were expansive and luminous, private apartments felt comparatively constrained, tucked behind ceremonial layers. Evenings transformed the Palais Rose into controlled spectacle. Invitations were formal, printed on heavy stock. Carriages arrived at the forecourt, wheels crunching softly against gravel. Guests ascended steps beneath Corinthian pilasters, greeted by liveried staff whose placement along corridors was carefully arranged. Candlelight multiplied in mirrored panels, turning single flames into constellations. The alignment of rooms allowed guests to progress through space as if through acts of a play. Conversation began in outer salons and intensified toward central chambers. Music drifted across thresholds. Servants circulated through concealed passages, ensuring that the visible spaces remained uncluttered by service. Hierarchy was embedded in floor plan. The most prestigious guests were guided toward the largest rooms. Lesser acquaintances remained nearer the periphery. Even seating arrangements reflected architectural intention. Chairs positioned beneath painted ceilings elevated status, those near doorways implied transience. The building amplified social pressure. To inhabit such a residence required constant awareness of observation. Gowns were selected not only for elegance but for their interaction with space, how fabric reflected candlelight, how silhouettes appeared when framed by tall doorways. Conversations unfolded beneath ceilings ornamented with mythological scenes, reminding participants of classical lineage. The house rewarded composure. Silence in certain corridors felt heavy. Marble absorbed warmth slowly, retaining coolness long into spring. Footsteps echoed in galleries when gatherings concluded and guests departed. After midnight, when servants extinguished candles and doors were closed in sequence, the Palais Rose seemed larger, almost cavernous. Maintenance extended beyond aesthetics. Heating vast salons required considerable fuel. Staff numbers remained high. Kitchens operated below ground, removed from ceremonial zones. Deliveries arrived discreetly through secondary entrances. The infrastructure that sustained elegance remained intentionally invisible. Children grew within this environment, yet childhood adjusted to architecture rather than reshaping it. Play was restricted to designated rooms. Running along the grand staircase was discouraged, the marble surface demanded decorum. The building trained behavior through scale. Marriage tensions unfolded within walls that magnified distance. When Count and Countess disagreed, the house provided both proximity and separation. Separate apartments allowed withdrawal, yet shared salons forced public unity. The architecture preserved appearance even when intimacy fractured. Servants understood the building intimately. They navigated hidden corridors and narrow staircases that guests never saw. From behind paneling, they observed the rituals of aristocracy while remaining outside its privileges. The dual circulation system, grand staircases for display, service stairs for labor, reinforced social division through physical design. Seasonal shifts altered mood. In winter, heavy draperies enclosed rooms, trapping warmth and dimming light. Fireplaces glowed beneath gilded mantles. In summer, windows opened toward the Bois de Boulogne, admitting distant sounds of carriage wheels and rustling leaves. The pink marble facade changed tone with weather, sometimes appearing almost pale white at dawn. The Palais Rose required repetition. Balls followed dinners, dinners followed receptions. To maintain legitimacy within Parisian society, the house had to remain visible. Invitations circulated continuously. The absence of events would have signaled decline. Gradually, the strain beneath ceremony became perceptible. Expenditure remained constant, expectations did not diminish. The building did not adapt easily to moderation. Its proportions discouraged simplicity. Even reduced gatherings felt sparse within rooms designed for grandeur. Within its walls, social performance was inseparable from architecture. The house shaped posture, controlled movement, and structured interaction. It rewarded elegance and exposed insecurity. The Palais Rose stood luminous on Avenue du Bois, its facade intact, its marble polished. From the outside, nothing suggested instability. Light still glowed from tall windows. Carriages still arrived in measured rhythm. Inside, however, the building demanded more than it gave. Its symmetry concealed tension. Its scale magnified difference. And its permanence, so carefully constructed, required constant renewal through wealth and unity that were not infinite. The fracture did not begin with war. It began with divorce. In 1906, after 11 years of marriage, Anna Gould and Boniface de Castellane separated. The legal proceedings were public, methodical, and financially consequential. The dowry that had financed the Palais Rose became a matter of negotiation. Control of resources shifted. The unity required to sustain the house dissolved. The architecture remained intact. Yet the building had been conceived as the physical expression of a marital alliance, American capital and French title fused into marble. Once that alliance ended, the ideological foundation weakened. The Palais Rose did not collapse, but its original narrative fractured. Anna Gould retained ownership. For a time, the house continued to function as a grand residence. Receptions persisted, though their tone shifted. The building no longer served as proof of conjugal synthesis. It became instead a monument to a completed chapter. Maintenance continued to demand substantial funds. Heating costs, staff wages, repairs to marble and gilding, these obligations did not diminish with emotional separation. The building required the same level of expenditure regardless of domestic harmony. In 1908, Anna Gould remarried, becoming the Duchess de Talleyrand. Her social position evolved. The Palais Rose remained hers, but its meaning altered. It was no longer a stage for the ambitions of Count de Castellane. It became one of several residences associated with a new lineage. Then came 1914. The First World War reshaped Europe's political and economic landscape. Paris was not razed, but it lived under threat. Social rituals contracted. Large-scale entertainments became less frequent. Resources were redirected. The culture of conspicuous display softened under the weight of national emergency. The Palais Rose survived intact. Its facade did not bear shell damage. Its marble remained unbroken. Yet the atmosphere within its rooms changed. Candlelit receptions gave way to quieter gatherings. Staff numbers fluctuated. The cadence of aristocratic life no longer aligned with pre-war certainty. After 1918, Europe entered a period of financial recalibration. Fortunes tied to land struggled under taxation and inflation. Even diversified wealth felt pressure. Grand urban residences, once symbols of stability, became increasingly burdensome. The Palais Rose, with its vast ceremonial spaces, did not easily adapt to economic restraint. Its scale resisted simplification. Closing in used rooms did not eliminate structural costs. Marble still required cleaning. Rooflines still required inspection. Gardens still demanded tending. Anna Gould maintained the house for decades. It endured through the interwar period, through shifting governments, through changing fashion in architecture and taste. Modernism began to influence Paris. Clean lines and reduced ornament emerged as markers of sophistication. Against this backdrop, the Palais Rose stood as an artifact of late 19th century revivalism. In 1939, war returned. The German occupation of Paris in 1940 altered the city's social structure. Many aristocratic houses were requisitioned or monitored. The Palais Rose survived without catastrophic destruction. Its walls did not fall. Its staircase remained standing. The building once again endured external crisis. But survival was not the same as vitality. After the Second World War, France entered a new era. Reconstruction, industrial modernization, and shifting urban priorities redefined value. Large private residences in prime locations faced increasing taxation and development pressure. Avenue Foch became attractive for subdivision and redevelopment. In 1961, Anna Gould died. With her death, the final personal link to the original construction disappeared. The house passed into the hands of heirs whose lives were not architecturally centered on the Palais Rose. For them, it represented inheritance rather than ambition. Inheritance divides. Maintenance costs remained high. Urban land values rose. The marble facade that once signified legitimacy now represented financial inefficiency. Developers evaluated the property not as a symbol, but as square meters. The decisive shift occurred not through scandal or bombardment, but through arithmetic. The cost of preserving the building exceeded the perceived benefit of its existence. The social function it had once performed, forcing entry into elite circles, was no longer required. The families connected to it were already integrated, or no longer dependent on such displays. In 1969, the decision was made to demolish. There was no dramatic public outcry sufficient to prevent it. Architectural preservation movements in France were still consolidating influence. The Palais Rose was admired, but not protected at the highest level. Marble was dismantled carefully. Decorative elements were sold or relocated. The grand staircase, once the axis of ceremony, was removed in sections. The pink facade, which had reflected Parisian light for over 70 years, was taken down stone by stone. The breaking point had not been war. It had been irrelevance combined with cost. The vision that gave birth to the Palais Rose could not survive without the social conditions that justified it. Once those conditions disappeared, once marriage fractured, once economies shifted, once inheritance diluted purpose, the architecture stood alone. And alone, it was no longer indispensable. Demolition did not erase the Palais Rose immediately. It dissolved it. When the decision was finalized in 1969, the building was not struck down in a single dramatic implosion. Instead, it was dismantled with deliberation. Marble blocks were numbered. Decorative panels were catalogued. Ironwork was removed intact. The house that had been assembled to project continuity was reduced to components. For decades, the Palais Rose had stood as a unified composition, facade, staircase, salons, gardens aligned into coherent argument. Now that argument was fragmented. The site on Avenue Foch did not remain empty for long. In post-war Paris, land held economic priority over memory. Apartment buildings and offices replaced private hotels, particularly across the western districts. The rhythm of the boulevard adjusted to modern density. The lot that once framed a pink marble palace was reabsorbed into the city's evolving geometry. What survived was not the house itself, but pieces. Sections of the grand staircase were transported and reinstalled elsewhere. Architectural elements entered private collections. Mantels and moldings, once aligned within enfilades, were relocated to rooms that bore no relation to their original proportions. Detached from context, they became artifacts rather than architecture. In this form, the Palais Rose persisted as dispersed memory. The demolition reflected broader shifts in European aristocratic life. The era in which urban palaces functioned as instruments of social negotiation had passed. Titles no longer required marble reinforcement. Legitimacy no longer depended on physical proximity to Versailles-inspired symmetry. The building had been conceived as a bridge between two worlds, American capital and French lineage. By the late 20th century, such bridges were no longer extraordinary. Transatlantic wealth and European aristocracy had long since integrated. The architectural assertion was no longer necessary. Maintenance costs, once justified by ambition, became unjustifiable without it. There were voices of regret. Architectural historians noted the loss. Some photographs circulated, capturing the facade in earlier light, the pink marble glowing softly against Parisian sky. Yet preservation movements had not mobilized in time, or with sufficient force, to prevent removal. The Palais Rose had not decayed structurally. It had not been condemned for instability. It was removed because its function had evaporated. Its decline was not visible in crumbling stone or collapsing roofs. It was visible in balance sheets and urban plans. A mansion built to simulate permanence could not defend itself against reclassification as surplus. In another era, such a building might have been converted into a museum, embassy, or cultural institution. But adaptation requires narrative continuity. The Palais Rose carried a story tied tightly to one marriage, one alliance, one expression of ambition. Detached from that context, its meaning became ambiguous. And ambiguity does not guarantee protection. What replaced it did not attempt imitation. Modern facades rose where marble once stood. Windows multiplied in regular grids. The scale of occupancy increased. The avenue remained prestigious, but its architectural language shifted toward efficiency. The site no longer slowed carriage wheels into an oval forecourt. Traffic passed without ceremony. Yet absence can be as instructive as presence. The disappearance of the Palais Rose illustrates a particular vulnerability of constructed legitimacy. Architecture can simulate inheritance, but it cannot generate it independently of social structure. When the structure changes, the building may find itself unsupported. Unlike medieval chateaux rooted in centuries of landholding, the Palais Rose was anchored in a late 19th century moment of transatlantic convergence. When that moment receded, the marble remained, but the justification thinned. Some fragments of the palace continue to exist in altered form. A staircase installed in a different residence does not carry the same procession. A mantelpiece removed from its salon cannot reproduce the spatial choreography of enfilade rooms. The parts survive, the composition does not. In this sense, the Palais Rose did not truly mutate. It did not evolve into new function within its original shell. It disassembled, its elements absorbed into other structures that bore different narratives. Avenue Foch today retains its width, its proximity to the Bois de Boulogne, its status among Parisian addresses. But no trace of pink marble signals where the palace once asserted itself. Only archival photographs and scattered fragments testify to its former alignment. The building that endured 2 world wars could not endure peacetime recalculation. Its survival had depended on violence sparing its walls. Its destruction depended on something quieter, the withdrawal of necessity. Stone can resist artillery. It cannot resist irrelevance. The address is unchanged. Avenue Foch still stretches wide toward the Arc de Triomphe. The Bois de Boulogne still borders its western edge. Trees still filter afternoon light across the pavement. Traffic moves steadily where carriages once slowed into an oval forecourt. But the pink marble is gone. Where the Palais Rose stood, there is no staircase broad enough to stage an entrance. No aligned enfilade pulling the eye through gilded thresholds. No facade catching sunlight in tones of diluted rose. The ground has been leveled, built upon, absorbed into a different architectural rhythm. Yet absence carries shape. Photographs remain, the Corinthian pilasters, the balustrade against the Parisian sky, the grand staircase rising with deliberate symmetry. In these images, the building appears permanent, immune to recalculation. Its marble reflects light as though time were incidental. It survived artillery. It survived occupation. It survived the reordering of Europe. What it did not survive was the disappearance of the need it once fulfilled. The Palais Rose had been constructed to argue that wealth could anchor itself in tradition through stone. For decades, that argument stood intact along Avenue du Bois. Guests ascended its staircase, candles multiplied in its mirrors, marble held steady beneath measured footsteps. Now, the marble exists only in fragments, relocated, recontextualized, detached from its original axis. The composition has dissolved. Stand on the avenue today and there is no visible trace of the palace's symmetry. No marker indicates where rose-colored stone once asserted continuity with Versailles. The site offers no resistance to modern geometry. And yet, the question lingers in the space it once occupied. If a palace built to simulate permanence can vanish without violence, what does that say about the permanence it claimed to represent?